Hey friends! So Ableton veteran Reid Stefan posted a video in which he laid out a list of things that he wishes were different with Ableton or things that he felt were missing with the software. So I watched the video, and while I don't normally post reaction videos, I found myself feeling the need to set the record straight on a few things. I also found myself agreeing with him on a few things, and I also wanted to add a few items of my own. Now, I'm not trying to throw any shade at Reid. He's been contributing to the community well before I have. Reid's channel has been an Ableton community mainstay for a super long time, and you should absolutely subscribe to his channel. And of course, it also goes without saying that I too make this video out of absolute love for Ableton, and for folks like Reid, who have made such an effort over the years to help people make rad music. So in Reid's original video, there was 12 different points that he wanted to make, and if you want to watch that video, that's up here or down in the description. But the format that I'd like to use here is I'd like to go over the things that Reid mentioned that I disagree with, and then some of the fixes that I'd personally like to see Ableton implement, and then the fixes that Reid suggested that I actually agree with. So let's go ahead and start with the first one.
This pertains to warp mode. Now, I'm a big fan of the Ableton warp modes, but when I'm recording vocals or doing vocal production over a beat, I'm usually not going to change the tempo of it or the key of it, and I don't need warp mode. Unfortunately, Ableton forces all audio recordings to be recorded in warp mode. So every time I make a recording, I have to double click it and turn off warp and then listen to it. When warp is activated, artifacts are being added to your audio. Even if you're not changing the tempo, even if you're not changing the pitch, if you have warp mode on, whether it's beats, complex, complex pro, or whatever, warp mode equals artifacts.
So this is actually false. And again, I'm not trying to throw any shade whatsoever at Reid, but let's go ahead and look at Ableton's settings real quick so that we can sort of break this down. If you go down to Record Warp Launch, you have this section right here where you can choose some of the warping options. One of the options you can choose is the default mode upon which Ableton will warp audio. Now, what is true about what Reid said is that Ableton makes you choose a default warping mode, and warping by default when you record audio will be set to on. And if you've never messed with this option before, it'll always be set to beats. So let's go ahead and do a couple tests. So the question is whether Ableton is creating artifacts by default when you record audio to beats mode. So I'm going to go ahead and record my voice here. Does Ableton create artifacts when you're using the beats warp mode? Okay, so here's my voice that I just recorded. Does Ableton create artifacts? Now, I will duplicate this track, okay? Now this track, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab an Ableton utility and drag it over it. And what I'm about to do is what's called a null test. And if I were to invert the phase of this second waveform, all I did was just duplicate the audio. So this is a second duplication of the first audio. Now what's going to happen when I play this audio back is there's going to be literally nothing audible. Okay, even though we can see, I'll go ahead and loop it again, even though we can see audio is obviously coming out of both of these tracks, the sum of these tracks, because one track is inverted from the other, is going to equal nothing. And the reason that is because the audio is perfectly out of phase with itself. If I were to, for example, take this audio and move it over a little bit, now they're not perfectly out of phase with each other, and there'll be something that you can hear. Does Ableton create art? Right, but if I move it back to the middle, it's gone, okay? Now at the moment, if you look at both of these audio clips, we can see that warp beats is on both of these audio clips. Now the question is whether having beats on at all creates audio artifacts, okay? So if I go ahead and unwarp this track, this is second track here, this is just a duplicate of the original audio, and go ahead and play this. If Reid's argument was true, then these two audio waveforms would not null. But if I play it, you'll see that they completely null. And if I go to my main track, for example, and put on a Spectrum, Spectrum will detect anything as quiet as possible. It'll still detect some audio. So if I go ahead and play this, nothing is coming up in Spectrum. There's literally nothing. This is a perfect null. So essentially, the second audio clip with the warp on or with the warp off has zero artifacts being added to it, okay? So if you have your Ableton defaulted to beats, there are going to be no artifacts generated whatsoever on freshly recorded audio. But there are a couple caveats. One thing is obvious. If you look up here, 154.07, what a weird BPM to have. If I were to put this on 153, for example, okay, this is not going to null. Why? because now Ableton has basically activated whatever stretching or warping it needs to do in order to make this audio fit into this. So now with this audio unwarped and this audio warped, take a listen. Does Ableton create artifacts when you're using the Beats warp mode? So we can hear that there is now some sort of difference between these two audios. But if I undo this and I go back to my original 154.07 weird beat per minute, we have a perfect null. So in this case, not only do I disagree, but I hope that I've proved the point here. I want, though, however, to instill something that he said, which is very important. And that's that if you have your audio set to, for example, complex mode, this actually does create artifacts right away, no matter what. If you have your default warping in your settings set not to beats, but instead to one of these other modes, you are going to have artifacts right away. So take a listen to this. Now, all that I've changed is that the default warp mode is complex. Does Ableton create artifacts when you're using the Beats warp mode? Does Ableton create artifacts when you're using the Beats warp mode? Right? There is a audible difference between the non-warped audio here, right? And then the warped audio here, okay? So again, using the Beats mode without changing the BPM, you are recording, you're going to be listening to, and you're going to be working with the raw audio, okay? I really wanted to set this one straight.
Number 9 is a missing feature, or I don't know, something that has just puzzled me since the beginning of my career using Ableton. When you warp audio, you have this great warping mode called Complex Pro. And it gives you a slider called Formants. And it does exactly what Formants in Little Altar Boy would do. This cool sliding bending effect where you can create an artificially deep voice or ramp it up and make it sound like your natural voice, even if you're pitching it down. The issue with this is this has to be the only control in Ableton that you can't automate. And there are so many times where I wished I could automate this, but you just can't.
Now this one's incorrect on a couple levels. If I turn on my automation right here, you'll notice that even if I click on any of these controls here, they're not obviously going to show up in the automation lanes for my arrangement view. Formants is not an automatable parameter because it's a clip parameter, and it lives over here actually. So you can automate this within the clip. So clicking on envelopes, we can see that Pro Formants is right here. So if I were to pitch this up, for example, and then I click on Formants here, I can, change the formants of this if I want. But I think that this is sort of overlooking a new and really awesome way that Ableton actually allows you to change the formants of audio. So undoing this, you'll notice that if I have this pitch set to 0, it doesn't matter what this setting is. Right? Only if I have pitch somewhere else does formants do anything. Let me undo all that, and let me show you something else. What we should do instead is grab an auto shift, because auto shift actually has a way to edit the formants right out the gate. Now you might be thinking, well, I don't want to change, or I don't want to auto shift the audio. You don't have to. You can actually turn the quantizer part, the pitch editing part, off. And so you can use the formant over here to actually change. You can change the formants right off the bat. I don't even have to change the incoming pitch of this. You can also do vibrato. So yeah, there's a lot of options inside of Auto Shift that you can do live pitch with. So there's definitely a way to automate formants, and as you can see up here, I can actually change those formant shifts in automation inside of Ableton. Just wanted to point that out. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so part of this video was I wanted to bring up some of the problems that I see with Ableton that I really hope end up getting addressed pretty soon. And again, all of this stuff is said out of absolute deep love for this software that has changed my life and like allowed me to do musical things that I never thought were possible. This is, in my opinion, the most critical fix that Ableton hopefully pays attention to and implements. So here's a project I have going on. Okay, Let's say I want to add a sequence to it. So here's the sequence here. I'll go ahead and take out the bass and chords so you can just hear the sequence. So that sounds right on time, right? The sequence is right on time with the beat. Now let's say I want to use something like Infiltrator to add some sort of like filter sequence to this. So I'll move Infiltrator over here and turn it on. You can hear what it does. Let's say that's what I want to add. That also totally works within time. That sounds exactly bang on. This grid matches up with the grid inside of Ableton. I'm going to go ahead and open the filter up here a little bit, and I'll go to the amp and I'll open up the release time and open up the sustain. And I'm doing this so that you can hear the effect more clearly as to what the Infiltrator is doing. Let's go ahead and turn on the Infiltrator. We can hear it's right on the beat, right? But if I just grab an effect, any effect that makes any processing latency at all, okay? Here's the spectral time that you can see is making 26.7 milliseconds of delay. If I turn the dry wet down, just having this effect in here, take a listen. Notice how it's late. If I delete it, it's perfectly on time. What's happening here? Why is this occurring? Well, essentially, the main thing that I want Ableton to fix is that within a signal chain, Ableton is not properly communicating the latency that a device makes into a processor that has some kind of LFO element in it, such as shaper box, Infiltrator, and any device that has a LFO that is MIDI synced. A lot of people don't even know this, and so they end up making this big set, and something just sounds weird or off timing, or maybe they even shift their music over in time to try to make it all line up. It's because this is, in my opinion, a vital thing to fix, where Ableton is not actually translating the delay that it needs to create for processors that make latency. Okay, so again, if you have a plugin like Infiltrator that has an LFO element, a synced element to it, and it's after a plugin that is making some sort of significant delay, you're going to get off timing, okay? This is something that has bothered me for years, and I really hope that Ableton fixes this and pays attention to this, because this is something that I really feel like is a vital, critical thing to fix. Okay, so I wanted to show you another quick example of this in a visual way so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. So right now, all I have is just an operator, and I'm running it into LFO tool. So yet again, another plugin that just has an LFO that is just kind of playing this sort of ducking thing every quarter note, right? So if I click on this track, I right click and I go to bounce to new track, we can see this is perfect, right? It goes right on the beat. Whoop, whoop, whoop. That's what we want, right? Now, if I go back here, I'll re-enable this track. If I go back here and I choose a FabFilter Pro L2, the reason I'm doing this is that the amplitude of this bass line won't ever hit the roof of Pro L. So basically Pro L, all that Pro L is going to be doing is just adding, as we can see, 60 milliseconds of latency. Okay, so it's just adding latency to the signal. Go ahead and listen now. I'll go ahead and mute this track. Listen now. Wait, it's off time, right? I'll prove it. Let's go ahead and bounce this to a new track. Bam. We can see, we can see it, right? We can see, if we zoom in, that the LFO is offset. Now, if you hover over any effect in Ableton and you put your mouse over the title, you'll be able to look down in the bottom left-hand corner and see how much latency it's making. So right now it's saying 60 milliseconds. If I zoom in here, right, I'll go ahead and Command 4, turn off my grid. I'll select this area of time that it is off by, and if we look at the bottom, we can see the duration of my selection is about 60 milliseconds, right? So what is happening? Ableton is not reporting to LFO tool what the offset is. So this problem is also within a signal chain. Another thing that I should show you is that, again, another thing I should show you is that at least with an LFO tool, you have the ability to offset everything. And I think that this is done, this is done in samples. So if I hover over here, 2880 samples. So if I say, all right, I'm going to negative offset 2880, right? Now, if I re-enable this track, we'll be able to hear. Let's go ahead and mute these. That's perfect. So again, if I go up here and I right click and I choose bounce to new track, it's back on again. But I had to manually go into this track and put in that offset, right? So the moral of the story for now is that if you have a device that is making any latency at all, and there are many devices that don't make any latency, if you follow that up with a device that has an LFO associated with it, you will be listening and printing a latent result, okay? So this is true even if you're using Ableton's own devices. Let's go ahead and I'll turn this off. We'll set this back to 0, the offset anyway. And then I'll grab just an Ableton compressor. So compressor by default makes 0 samples of latency. But if you turn up the look-ahead time to 10 milliseconds, then you get, of course, 10 milliseconds of latency, right? Or look-ahead time. So I'll go ahead and re-enable this track, right-click, and then I will bounce to a new track. And look at that. Even here, even in this example, I got to zoom in real close. I'll select this area of time, and we can see, yep, 10 milliseconds off. Okay, so yeah, this is a big issue, and I really, really hope that Ableton pays attention and fixes this, because I think a lot of people are kind of smearing their music and they don't understand why that's happening. And again, it also could make some interesting results, and it could make the music have potentially some swagger. But at the end of the day, we want to make that choice. We don't want the software to make that choice for us. Okay? So the other thing I wanted to bring up that is definitely not a fix, it's more just like a feature that I feel like Ableton should add, and that is called ARA Support. Essentially, it gives the other software that the DAW is working with, it gives this other software immediate access to that audio to be able to edit it in some way. So this allows software like Melodyne to do pitch correction. It also allows for other software like Isotope RX or for Auto Align or Vocaline or whatever. It just makes working with lots of different audio tracks with these proprietary external tools a lot faster and a lot easier to use. But with saying that, I also want to point something else out. Ableton 12, to me, when the update came out, and then the subsequent updates like 12.1, 12.2, 12.3, and 12.4, all those updates felt like Ableton completely changed their direction and started listening intensely to the fan base. So all I'm going to say about, ARA and then all the other things that have been mentioned here in this video is just stay tuned. Like, I really feel like Ableton is listening, and we're like in a really cool time where it feels like the developers at Ableton are really trying hard to listen to what people have to say. So I say, along with all this, to stay positive and stay vocal about the things that you really want this software to do, because they really are listening, and we're getting all kinds of really awesome features, not even added as like new versions, but just updates to the software itself. So I just say sit tight, stay tuned. All the things that are mentioned in this video are likely coming because, yeah, I feel like Ableton is really listening to its fan base. Okay, so now in this video, I'd like to move on to the things that Reid said that I actually agree with and hope that Ableton implements. Let's go.
This feature request is easily been the longest standing feature request out of the entire list. I'm talking about the limitation of 12 aux tracks. I don't get it. Let's say you have 4 different delays, 8th note, quarter note, 16th note, half note, and maybe 2 reverbs, one long and one short. You've already used half of your aux track allowance, and that's just vocal production.
I agree here. In general, I don't think that most people are going to be using over 12 return tracks, but I just don't see a reason for that limitation to exist.
Now, number 3 is what I call the third-party plugin black box. It's not a glitch. It's kind of a design relic from back when Ableton was only for live use. You see, Ableton stock plugins are designed to be displayed here at the bottom in their entirety. There's no larger window for you to click and open. However, third-party plugins are the opposite. You have to open the window to control them in any way, shape, or form. So how do you do that? You click this itty bitty little wrench button right here next to the name of your plugin, and boom, there's the window. Now, in my opinion, that button is way too small. And what's way too big is this giant black box that nobody ever uses anymore.
So I actually agree with this sentiment. The little wrench is entirely too small. And yes, the XY pad, it is definitely a relic from back in the day. It's obviously not as useful as some of the other features.
What this is the XY knob. And you could basically assign multiple knobs to be moved at the same time by grabbing this dot and dragging it around inside the box. Nobody does that. I could see if you were on stage and you had to turn 4 knobs with 1 knob, maybe you'd set this up. But I think it's safe to say people use this horizontal view way more than they use this vertical view. And I could see how this black box has a use in the vertical view, but in the horizontal view, we need to get this out of here. To help fix what I like to call the black box of pointlessness, I've found 3 better designs. Now, the first one is made by a third-party developer who took a few popular brands and created a little plugin wrapper that you can control from the outside, just like an Ableton plugin here at the bottom of your screen. This is probably not the easiest solution, so what I like to present to you is solution number 2, and this was just dropped on us about a week ago by Studio Pro, the new DAW that used to be Studio One. Fender changed the name to Studio Pro, and they gave you a channel overview where the third-party plugins have usable macro knobs that you can click on, or a little button to open the full interface, just like you would in Ableton. Now, these macro knobs automatically assign to whatever the first 4 controls in your plugin are. Sometimes that's useful, sometimes that's not. But these macro knobs are infinitely more useful than the black box of nothingness that Ableton has had us using since the dawn of Ableton.
Okay, so yes, these plugin wrappers are actually pretty cool, and I like the idea of being able to, double click on a track and then within the track have your, plugins be able to be interacted with. But some plugins will never make sense in that formulation. I mean, for example, some of the most useful plugins, such as, Pro Q4, FabFilter Pro Q4, or anything like that, or Pro MB, you're not going to get, you're not going to be able to use it down here. It's too small. At the end of the day, I think it's possible, and I imagine Reid has to know this, but if you have a plugin, let's use this 1176 from UAD, for example. Now, yeah, I mean, in this case, you probably could use this down here at the bottom. But again, if you were using a different plugin with a lot more bells and whistles, it would be really hard to use down here. But I just want to show you something. Like, he's pointing at a completely different DAW, and there are solutions for having macros that you can use. Well, Ableton has this ability too. If you right-click on the top, you can go to Group, or Command or Control G, and then you have macros that you can assign to whatever you have on the plugin. And you can see that in this plugin, there are a low amount of controls. And due to the low amount of controls, Universal Audio has exposed these controls to Ableton. So I can just go through here, of course, and map all these controls to the various and assorted macros here. And it even is going to, whatever name the developer decided to default these controls to, it'll actually automatically name those here at the top. I'm not going to do the meter. I'll do the sidechain filter, sure. I'll do the mix, headroom, and as you can see, I've run out of macros, so you can hit the plus button, and then you'll get, power or whatever. Now, doing this every single time is super annoying. I don't want to do that. And I want to use Ableton's proprietary, if I want to use Ableton's proprietary view down here at the bottom of the track, I can actually exit out of this. I can turn off seeing any of this, and now I've made myself an audio effect rack. And if I hit the little disk icon, I can save this as 1176 macros or something, I don't know. And now this is saved inside of Ableton. So now I can drag and drop this inside of my track at any time and use these controls right here, right? Now, what do I lose in this situation? Well, I lose my ability to actually even see the needle go up and down to see whether I'm having any effect over the signal or not. Now, you could actually argue that maybe this is an advantage in some ways because you're using your ears to mix as opposed to using your eyes. But at the end of the day, this just furthers my original point, and that's that not all plugins will make sense down here at the bottom. A lot of plugins will make a lot more sense exposed so that you can see their controls. So again, looking at something like Pro Q, at the end of the day, I'm going to have a lot better of a time using this plugin completely exposed here, right? I can see, obviously, all the different things that it can do, and this would be very hard to control. Just the aspect ratio that defaults in Pro Q obviously makes more sense to be exposed, a little bit bigger. I mean, look at the size of this text. It'd be a silly proposition to ask the developers to create something that would fit in the lower quarter of the screen and be able to be used, right? It's just such a small little thing. I wanted to use the UAD 1176 here because it happens to be a plugin that might actually work in that formulation. And again, Reid does correctly point out that there are these awesome third-party wrappers that you can use for some plugins if that's something that you really want to do. And something else I want to point out is that when you load up a plugin down here, you can see that there's this sidechain input section, and I got to say that's really useful. And also, if you double-click on any plugin title bar, you can actually make it really small. So if this XY thing really bothers you that much, you can just double-click on the title and get it out of the way. And then you still have your little wrench right here. Maybe it'd be cool if Ableton made the wrench icon a lot bigger. I agree with that. And again, going back to the sidechain part, this is super useful. You have the ability to blend between a sidechain input. Let's say I chose a different track. You can blend between the sidechain input. You can gain it up or down. And this will allow the plugin to interpret that sidechain signal however you see fit. And what mix does is essentially listen to the input audio, and then you can mix it with the sidechain input. This is really super useful, in my opinion, and I really think that this is a great addition that Ableton has added. It'd be awesome if you could honestly double-click on the title, and it would leave the sidechain input part within there, because that, in my opinion, is a much more useful use case for this little de facto box that comes in when you load up a third-party plugin. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on.
Number 6, I don't think anybody is going to disagree with. The audio to MIDI conversion is awesome and unique, and a lot of DAWs don't have it. But I'm not going to lie, the MIDI that it produces is kind of questionable. And sometimes it's so wildly off that it's quicker to just figure out how to trace it by ear than to use the feature altogether.
This is definitely something that is pretty true because, I mean, at this point, there are a lot of other softwares and AI features and stuff like that that can interpret the audio a little bit better than Ableton's own proprietary system to extract MIDI notes from audio. So here is a chord progression, and if I right-click, something that I think that Reid should have pointed out is that harmony is the option that you choose if you have chords. Melody is the option that you choose if you have a singular melody. So if I were to choose harmony, for example, we can see that we actually have a pretty decent conversion here. Now, of course, there are little notes down here. Now, why are these notes appearing? Why is this happening? Well, essentially, that's because there are not only harmonics being generated above the fundamental frequencies of the keys, there are also effects causing the MIDI interpretation algorithm to create more notes. Now, if I were to grab an EQ8, however, and I were to put it over these keys, check this out. We can see that the lowest fundamental is here and the highest is right there. Potentially something that he's suggesting is that the algorithm would by default do something like this, where it would automatically filter out, or it would intelligently filter out what the fundamental notes are right here. Right? So now that I've done this, I'll hit Command or Control B, and that will bounce this audio. So now we have this audio. Right? I'll go ahead and put this up here, and let's go ahead and do the same process. I'll right-click and choose Convert Harmony. And again, the harmony algorithm is a little bit more complex than the melody algorithm, but now you can see that we have less notes. See how many more notes that this made? Take a listen now. Other than a couple of those lower notes that are just easy to delete, this is pretty useful MIDI, okay? Now, let's go ahead and do the melody. So here's a trumpet. If I right-click and I choose the correct algorithm, convert melody to new MIDI track, let's take a look at the MIDI. We can see that it made one extra note there, but because we chose the right algorithm and because we this doesn't have any effects on it, this is a little bit easier to interpret, okay? However, let's put a delay on here. Right, so there's some sort of delay on it, and then we Command B, and then we have this one, and we try to derive a melody from that. Of course, we're going to be running into probably a lot whacker of a result. right? It's having a harder time interpreting the notes. And yeah, a lot of this stuff could be done with newer technologies. So in this case, yeah, I definitely agree. I just felt like maybe clarifying how to get this system to react a little bit better would be an important thing to do. Cool, well, I really hope that you enjoyed this video. I enjoyed making it. I'm not always going to be making reaction videos like this, but I really felt compelled to do this one, especially because I wanted to set the record straight on the warping situation. If you have fixes that you feel like you would like Ableton to implement, please list them down below in the comments. I love to have these kinds of conversations, especially if they're constructive and they help move the community and move the software forward. So yeah, much love, everybody. Thanks for watching. If you like this kind of thing, like, comment, subscribe. Much love. I'll see you next time.